Were you ever enamored by a speaker with outstanding oratory abilities? Someone who is mighty in words and could always inspire a reaction from the audience? And then you were greatly dismayed to find out they'd divorced their wife of 30 years and married a woman younger than their oldest child. You see, something sadly is lacking in such a person, and that something is character. In your pursuit of excellence, while developing the disciplines of your life, be sure that included in your concept of success is the constant striving for Christian character. Success is empty without character. Let the following lesson be a milestone in your growth toward the person God called you to be. I would like to talk about Christian character. And in the book of Amos, chapter 8, is a story of turmoil in a land. It describes a basket of summer fruit. This overripe fruit depicts the decaying moral and spiritual state of Israel. When we look at Israel at the time of Amos, it was in a sad predicament. They had forgotten God. They had become very materialistic. They had wanted to gather riches. They were drinking wine out of bowls. They were lying on beds of ivory. They were not grieved for the afflictions of Joseph. They cared not about the poor. They sold the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of shoes. Sounds like today. In contrast, the following verses exemplify God's divine nature. As Christian leaders, we must be partakers of the nature of God. In 2 Peter, the first chapter, it says, "Add to your faith virtue, to virtue knowledge, to knowledge temperance, to temperance godliness, to godliness brotherly kindness, to brotherly kindness charity." In other words, when you find God, it's an addition. It's not a subtraction. The devil subtracts. He divides. He takes away. But the Lord adds and he multiplies. Also in Ephesians 4:11-13 it states, "Unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ." That's what Jesus wants us to measure up to. The word perfect in the Greek means complete in labor, in growth, in mental and moral character. So in our world today, a man, if he wants that kind of character, he's got to develop it. And I challenge you in this lesson that you would want to have sterling character as you walk with Jesus Christ. There can be no doubt that virtue and character are mandatory in Christian leadership. Many of you will be leaders. Some of you will be preachers. And in the development of your life, in the knowledge that you gain, the experience that you accumulate, there's one thing that has to continually develop in your life, and that is Christian character. There's a great significance to Christian character. Webster's dictionary describes character as moral excellence, firmness, an aggregate of distinctive qualities, and a complex of mental and ethical traits. That's Christian character. General Norman Schwarzkopf, we heard about him during the First Gulf War, made a speech to the cadets, and in it he said this, "I've met a lot of leaders in the Army who were very competent, but they didn't have character. And for every job they did well, they sought reward in the form of promotions, in the form of awards and decorations, in the form of getting ahead at the expense of someone else, in the form of a piece of paper that awarded them another degree, a sure road to the top. You see, they were competent, but they lacked character." He also said, "I have met a lot of leaders who had superb character, but who lacked competence. They weren't willing to pay the price of leadership. to go the extra mile, because that's what it takes to be a leader. And that's sort of what it's all about. To lead in the 21st century, to take soldiers, sailors, and airmen into battle, you'll be required to have both character and competence. And may I say, if you want to lead in God's kingdom, you will need character and competence. What it takes to lead an army, materially, it takes to lead God's army. In his speech, he says success requires more than talent and energy and personality. The triumph of character is the only real success in life. Character is what you're willing to do when the spotlight has been turned off, when the applause has died down and no one is around to give you credit. That's character. He also said there's a tendency today to absolve individuals of moral responsibility and treat everybody like victims of social circumstance. There was a Menendez case a few years ago. These two boys took a shotgun and shot their parents at point-blank range several times. They shot them more times than it took to kill them. At their first trial, their attorney got them off because she said and convinced the jury that they'd been abused, that they were under great duress and stress, and the jury let them off. Fortunately, they were tried again and convicted. But they did not want to take the blame, and society did not want them to take the blame for what they had done. You see, in Christianity and in character, we need role models. In the Old Testament, there's a story of Uriah. In 2 Samuel, the 11th chapter, his name means Jehovah is light, and he was a descendant of Heth. Uriah was a Hittite. He was from an accursed race, but he married Bathsheba, the granddaughter of Ahithophel, one of the wisest men that David ever had in his kingdom. Eliam was the father of Bathsheba, but Ahithophel was the grandfather. Uriah rose from nothing, from this background of a cursed race. He rose to be one of David's 30 mighty. He was brave on the battlefield, and he lived close to the palace. He was a proselyte. He had come to believe in Judaism. He's on the battle, but he returns at David's request. David had sinned with Uriah's wife, and he wanted to cover his sin. And so David brought him home, and he sent Uriah home, but he didn't go home. He stayed with the servants, and he slept with the servants in the palace. And David the next day asked him, "Why did you choose not to go home, but to stay and sleep with the servants?" And he said this, "The ark of Israel and Judah abide in tents, while Joab and the army are encamped in open fields. I cannot go home and enjoy the pleasures of home." And so this man stayed and slept in the palace with the servants. That, my friend, is character. King David even got him drunk, but he wouldn't go home, even when he was drunk. He died fighting valiantly in the battle. Joab put him to the front of the wall, and an arrow pierced him, and he died. It's a testimony of Uriah's character. I know there's been a book written about it, and they tried to depict him as somebody who was rude and crude and angry and mean. But the Bible doesn't show him that way. In fact, in Matthew, the 1st chapter, his name is in the genealogies of Jesus Christ, a man of character, and he demonstrated sterling character in his actions. He was a role model of integrity. The Judge Antonin Scalia writes, "Bear in mind that brains and learning, like muscle and physical skills, are articles of commerce. They are bought and they are sold. You can hire them by the year or by the hour. The only thing that's not for sale, the judge says, is character. I like that. It's the only thing you can't buy. You have to earn it and develop it. In the book of Job, the 31st chapter, there's a record of Job's transparent exposure to God. See, Job's wife asked him in that 9th verse of the 2nd chapter, "Dost thou still retain thine integrity?" And Job answers, "I have made a covenant with my eyes." Second statement, "I have not lied." Now you're talking about character. "I have not been deceitful. I have not mistreated my servants. I have not ignored the poor. I have not eaten my morsel alone. I have not loved gold. I have not rejoiced over the ruin of my enemies. I have not refused the poor and homeless, and I have not hidden my transgression." You're talking about a pure heart and a pure mind. You're talking about a person who lives with pure purpose, a man of sterling character. In the 31st chapter of the book, in the 6th verse, Job cries out, "Let me be weighed in a just balance." What for? That God may know my integrity. Integrity means the state of being complete. He said, "I want you to know that I am complete." Integrity is not what we do, but it's what we are. Our words must match our deeds. Integrity is the establishment of a system of values against which all of life is judged. In the 26th chapter of Psalms, the 1st verse, the psalmist says, "I have walked in my integrity." And the Bible is full of such statements. What kind of person do you want to be? You want to be a person who is known, a person who has a great reputation. You want to be a person that people swarm to and like to be around. But more than that, do you want to be somebody who's got something down in their heart, down inside their bosom that's pure, integrity, character, and somebody who is always the same every time you see them? Dwight Eisenhower said this, "The supreme quality for leadership is unquestionable character and integrity." The decision to maintain our integrity is so important because it's going to affect those around us. In the book of Proverbs 20:7, it says, "The just man walketh in his integrity. His children are blessed after him." And the following excerpt provides an example of what happens when our integrity is not maintained. Listen to this story. Years ago in Germany, there was a young Jewish boy growing up. He had a profound respect for his father. He admired his father. This Jewish man saw that his family was in the synagogue on a regular basis. The whole family life revolved around the synagogue and around their religion. The father took care of that faithfully for many years. But in the teen years of this young lad, the family moved. They moved to a town in Germany that didn't have a synagogue. All they had was the Lutheran church. And after several weeks and months of being there, over the dinner table one night, the father announced, "We're going to abandon our Jewish traditions and we're going to join the Lutheran church." The young family was stunned, and the young lad was stunned beyond explanation. And they asked him, "But Dad, why would we abandon our Jewish traditions?" He said, "It's good for business. The whole town goes to the Lutheran church, so we have to go to the Lutheran church." This young lad was bewildered and confused. His deep disappointment soon gave way to anger and a deep, intense bitterness that plagued him throughout his life. Later, he left Germany. The young lad grew up. He went to the university and he studied in England. Each day found him at the British Museum. He was formulating his ideas and he was composing a book. In that book, he offered a whole new worldview and conceived a movement that was designed to change the world. He described religion as the opiate of the masses. He committed the people who followed him to a life without God, and his ideas became the norm for the governments of almost half of the world population. His name was Karl Marx, founder of the communist movement. The history of the 20th century and beyond that was significantly affected because of one father who let his values be distorted. He did not retain his integrity. Unless you think that Karl Marx might have been a great man, after changing the world with his ideas, 6 people attended the funeral of Karl Marx. 2 of his children died suicidal. He was not a great man. He was used of the devil to deceive the multitudes. But in the Bible, we read about great men that had character and integrity. One was Abraham. In Genesis 18, it tells the story of Abraham pleading for Sodom. He stands before God. The Bible says that these 3 men, one of them was a theophany. It was God in angelic form. And they said, shall we go down and destroy Sodom without telling Abraham, our friend? No. And so they tell Abraham. And the Bible says Abraham stood before the Lord. He looked him in the face and he said, God, you won't destroy the righteous with the wicked, would you? A man of integrity. He intercedes on behalf of other people. In Genesis 22, this noble man offers his only son of promise on the altar, and as much as killed him. He fully intended to do what God asked him to do. It tells the story of how he rises early in the morning. He takes 2 young men with him. He takes everything he needs. He takes the wood. He takes the rope. He takes the fire. He takes the knife. He intends to offer Isaac for a sacrifice. He did not play games with God. A lot of people are playing games with God, and they're playing fast and loose in these games. And they think God doesn't know, but he knows the thought and the intent of our hearts. He was willing to offer the son of promise as a sacrifice, demonstrating his obedience to and his trust in God's word. He went to great lengths to carry out God's orders. He rose early. He was absolutely prepared. He was all ready for the task. He was meticulous in his obedience, even to the most difficult task that God had ever asked him to perform. Abraham refuses to strive with Lot when their herdsmen are fighting over the forage for the sheep and there's not enough for all of their flocks. Abraham had a proclamation from God. God had called him. He was the owner of the land. God had given it to him. But he says to Lot, Lot, our flocks are too big to feed together, so you take your choice. If you want the well-watered plains of Sodom, you may have them. If you want the hills on the other side, you may have them. You take what you want, and I will take the rest. You talk about integrity and character. When Abraham took his men and defeated the 5 kings at the valley of Sheva and recaptured Lot after they had destroyed Sodom, the king of that city said, look, I want to reward you. But Abraham said, no. You will say, I have made Abraham rich. I cannot receive anything that you give to me. He showed his greatness again when he met Melchizedek, the king and priest. He met him outside the city, and the Bible says that Abraham gave tithe of all. He showed his submission to the ministry. You see, the pure motives that lay behind the deeds of Abraham clearly define his character. He always thought of God and others before he considered himself. God could trust him explicitly to follow instructions. Abraham did not obey the commandments of God out of fear, but because of who he was and because of his strength of character. That's why Abraham acted like he did. In spite of his faults and his one great sin, King David had a lot of character. He said, the God of Israel said in 2 Samuel 23:3, the rock of Israel spoke to me, and he said, he that ruleth over men must be just. In 1 Kings 15:5 it states, David did God's commandment save only in the matter of Uriah. David survived the storm because of character. He took the blame. God, it's my fault. And when you read that chapter in the book of Psalms, he said, God, I have sinned. It's my transgression. Cleanse me, purge me, and over he uses the personal pronoun because this man of character had had a failure, but he did not want to die lost. And so he appeals to God. He shows his sterling character by grieving over Abner when Abner died just outside the gates of the city. He said, oh, Abner, you died like a fool died. Your hands were not tied and your feet were not in fetters. You didn't have to do what you did. And he grieved over a man who had been his enemy. He spared Saul's life twice when Saul was trying to kill him. You talk about character. And he took the blame for numbering Israel. 70,000 men died. And he said, God, it's not these people's fault. I did it. I take the blame. Judge me, God. And God did judge him. When he wanted to buy Araunah's threshing floor and offer a sacrifice after this mistake, he went up to the top of Moriah, and then he said to Araunah, I want to buy your threshing floor. But Araunah said, oh, no, I will give it to you. I will give you the oxen. I will give you their harness to offer on the altar, and you can have it all. But listen to the words of this man of character. He said, I will not offer that unto the Lord, which costeth me nothing. He refused to use his position to take advantage of his fellow man. Another great role is that of Joshua. Joshua showed his character when he was so loyal to Moses. He followed Moses everywhere. And when great stress was on this man's life, when the people were murmuring and complaining against their leader, he showed what a second man ought to be. Always he was there. Character eked out of the pores of this man's skin. And God not only made him a great leader, he made him commander-in-chief. And Moses gave him that order before he died, and he became commander-in-chief of about 4 million people. That's what God does to people of character. One of the beautiful examples in the Bible of character is Joseph. Now, watch this young lad. His father loved him so much that we would say he spoiled him. He gave him more than the other brothers got. He gave him more attention than the other. Can you understand why they were jealous? Everything was bestowed upon Joseph, and they hated him for it. So he was favored by his father, but hated by his brothers. He was betrayed by his brothers. He lived for 13 years with unfulfilled dreams. Notice, he survives seduction. He earns his master's trust. He responds to responsibility. He refuses to sin against God. He lives through slavery, and he lives through prison. He experiences broken promises. The baker and the butler said, we'll remember you, but they did not. They forgot him. And then he refuses to improperly use his power after becoming prime minister. His brothers are there, and he could have had them killed. Instead, he forgives his brothers. He weeps on their shoulders. Joseph's sterling character emerges through his actions in the face of adversity. What a man of character. In the story of the life of David, there's a man that stands out so greatly. His name is Ittai. He was a Gittite. He accompanied David when he fled from Absalom. Absalom had taken the palace. He was living in the palace. David was fleeing from Absalom. The situation was very bleak. David was barefoot. He had sackcloth on. He's fleeing the palace. He's fleeing for his life because Absalom is going to kill him. And here's Ittai. And on top of that, Ahithophel, the wisest man in his kingdom, has decided to cast his lot with Absalom. Why? Let me tell you why. Because Ittai was righteous, but Ahithophel had a fatal flaw in his character. While he stood before David and gave out words of wisdom, he had an unforgiving spirit in his heart because his granddaughter Bathsheba had been violated by David, and Ahithophel never forgave David. When he got the opportunity of revenge, he cast his lots with Absalom, and he gave counsel that would have destroyed David. But here's Ittai. He's walking behind the king. He's crying. He's barefoot. He's got sackcloth on. He doesn't look like a king. He doesn't act like a king. But he looks at Ittai, and here he's walking along, and he said, Ittai, look, Absalom's not going to bother you. You're not a Jew. He won't bother you. Why don't you go back and be at peace in the kingdom? And I like what Ittai said. Ittai said, whether in life or in death. I like that. So will thy servant be. This statement demonstrated true character. Whether you die or you live, King David, I will be there with you. What we need today is a role model, not a motto, but a model. As examples of Christian character, we must not allow our lips to violate our heart, to say things that we really are not. The measure of a man's true character is what he would do if no one saw and no one knew. That's character. A man of character is never for sale. He cannot be bribed, and there is no middle ground on the field of honor. You see, quality control is never about the product. It's about the process. If the process is right, the product is guaranteed. In the Space Shuttle Challenger, they did not have the process right. It was not done with real skills and checking back again and again as they should have. And the Challenger, of course, was destroyed. You see, the way you react to circumstances in your life determines whether you will succeed or fail. How do I react to circumstance? Character will make you react right. You see, character makes the difference. The following men demonstrated flaws in their character. In adversity, they failed. Joab had a fatal flaw. He was the leader of David's army. He was the captain. He had great honor and renown. He had climbed up that tunnel and opened the gates of where the Jebusites were. And David finally conquered them. And he was the one who became the captain. But he collaborated with Adonijah to commit treason and to make Adonijah king. His final fate, he dies holding the altar. And after he committed treason, David said he's going to pay with his life. And he's holding the horns of the altar and pleading for mercy, but there was no mercy for him. I mentioned Ahithophel, the wisest man in David's kingdom, but he had that fatal flaw. He could not forgive. It's important that we have enough character in our life to forgive people. People will abuse you. They will misuse you. They will say things about you that are not true. They will lie on you. But if you've got real Christian character, you can forgive. Shimei cursed David when he's leaving the city of Jerusalem. He never, ever had character. And when David was at his weakest moments, he cursed this great king, a man without character. You see, character or lack of it accompanies us all of our life. It tells who and what we are. Written on the tombstone were these words: "Here lies John Smith, a politician and an honest man." And somebody came along and read the inscription, and it said, "Isn't it awful? They had to put two men in the same tomb?" Two clean-shaven men in a jail cell discussed their business failure. And one said, "I thought our level of corruption fell within the community standards." And that's about the way a lot of people feel today. Here's examples that demonstrate profound difference that good character can make in a generation. Now, listen to this story. The story of Max Jukes. He was an atheist. He married a girl who was an infidel. And from this marriage, they had 540 descendants that they've been able to track. And this is what became of those descendants. 310 died as paupers. 140 of these were criminals. 7 were murderers. 100 were drunkards. And half of the females were prostitutes. Quite a genealogy. Altogether, the family cost the government $2,500,000. But let's look on the other side. Jonathan Edwards, a Puritan preacher, married a dear Christian girl, and from that marriage, 1,394 descendants were traced. Now, that's almost 3 times the number Max Jukes had. Of them, 100 were preachers. Oh, I like that. 295 were college graduates. 65 were college professors. 13 were college presidents. 60 were authors of good books. 60 were Army and Navy officers. 30 became judges. 3 became United States senators. And 1 became vice president of the United States. All of them together did not cost the government 1 single cent. We're talking about character. It's beneficial in all phases of life. Character makes the difference. Future generations are challenged to excellence by demonstrations of integrity, honesty, and purity in the lives of their elders. That's why we have to walk right. The way you walk is important. Someone is following in your footsteps. We need character development, ongoing development. The key to building character in others is an absolute surrender of self to all that is noble and godly. Jesus was a master character builder. In Matthew 5, he taught about meekness and humility, desiring righteousness, being merciful, being pure in heart. And he said this: "You are the salt of the earth." And salt is that substance that makes food enjoyable. God's people with character add a very special quality to humanity. Jesus talked about peacemaking. He talked about letting your light shine. And when people search for a proper way of life, they'll need to see godly examples to follow. Hebrews, the 2nd chapter and the 16th verse says this, that he took not on him the nature of angels, but he took upon him the seed of Abraham. You see, his body was human. He was a man displaying character. Character, character, character. Jacob was a deceiver and a supplanter, but he became Israel and a prince at Peniel. His ambitions changed when he prayed through, when he wrestled with that angel. You see, maturity often refines the thinking process. In youth, he cried, "Give me energy to change my world." In middle age, he cried, "Give me energy to change those close to me." In old age, he cried, "Lord, give me grace to change myself." That's where I am. True character and integrity in leaders is crucial because your character will influence those you lead. You must not use your position to bully or threaten. You must not allow your position to destroy you. We teach what we know and we reproduce what we are. Honesty is integrity of the soul. Abraham Lincoln said, "Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man and you want to test his character, give him power." And I have seen this in my lifetime. Lincoln lost the senatorial election to Judge Douglas because he declared that slavery must be stopped. His convictions were stronger than his desire to be a senator of the United States of America. George Bush said this, "There is but one use of power, and that is to serve the public." I read about George Washington and what people said about him, a man of sterling character. When the cornerstone of George Washington Monument was laid in 1848, Mr. Winthrop said this, "Build it to the skies. You cannot outreach the loftiness of his principles. Found it upon the massive and eternal rock. You cannot make it more enduring than his fame. Construct it of the purest paraffin marble. You cannot make it purer than his life." Quite a statement. Gladstone, the British statesman and Prime Minister of England, called Washington the purest figure in history. And he said this, "Among all the pedestals supplied by history for public character and extraordinary nobility and purity, if I saw one higher than all the rest, and if I were required in a moment's notice to name the fittest occupant of it, I think that my choice at any time within the last 45 years would have been George Washington." Think of that. Lord Brougham said, "Until time shall be no more, will attest to the progress which our race has made in wisdom and virtue be derived from the veneration paid to the immortal name of Washington." And then we're tested. Everything God gives us, he tests and sees that it's there. And when he tests us, he purifies. He makes us better than we were if we stand the test. 2 Peter 1:4 says, "Whereby are given unto us exceeding great and precious promises, that by these we might be partakers of his divine nature." We become partakers of the nature of Jesus Christ. The poem says this, "Am I true to myself? I have to live with myself, and so I want to be fit for myself to know. I want to be able, as days go by, always to look myself straight in the eye. I don't want to stand with the setting sun and hate myself for the things I've done. I don't want to keep on a closet shelf a lot of secrets about myself. I don't want to fool myself as I come and go into thinking that nobody else will know the kind of man that I really am. I don't want to dress up myself in sham, to go out with my head erect. I want to deserve all men's respect. But there in the struggle for fame and self, I want to be able to like myself. I don't want to look at myself and know that I'm bluster and bluff and empty show. I can never hide myself from me. I see what others may never see. I know what others may never know. I can never fool myself, and so, whatever happens, I want to be God's man of the hour for eternity." I have seen preachers that did great sermons. They sounded so masterful. Sometimes the responses was great. But behind the curtain of those persons' lives, there was a great lack of character. I saw this happen years ago in my ministry. A young man came on the scene out of the ghettos of the big city. He had never known about teaching and living and developing the nature of Jesus Christ in his life. But his preaching was outstanding, and crowds flocked to him. And his ambition was to preach in larger and larger churches until he could preach at a general conference of the United Pentecostal Church. But he did not survive very long because he lacked character. You can't bring a man out of the ghettos who has no character, who's been in the gangs with the drugs and all the things that go with it, and put him in the pulpit. He's got to have a time of development, of growing, and he's got to understand that inside of him has got to be something that's sterling and real. Integrity has to reside there, and character must be a part of all that he is. You see, the divine nature of Jesus Christ builds character. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus used just very simple illustrations to demonstrate what he wanted his followers to be. The very essence of that Sermon on the Mount that Jesus taught was Christian character. As Christian leaders and examples of Christian character, we've got to bear marks of distinction that set us apart from everybody else. People knew the disciples had been with Jesus. And the disciples were called Christians at Antioch. They didn't tell the people at Antioch, we're Christians, we've been with Jesus. No, they walked like Jesus. They talked like Jesus. They looked like Jesus. They acted like Jesus. They thought like Jesus. And so they said, well, they're just little mini Jesuses. The letters I-A-N mean pertaining to. And so Christian means pertaining to Christ, or one who is like Jesus Christ. Christian character is one of the highest marks of distinction that a person can have. There are attributes of Christian character. Honesty, no matter what it costs you. Honesty should be your bond. Loyalty, unquestionable, to God, to His Word, to the church, to the ministry. Deep, abiding convictions that never change, that are Bible-based convictions, and these convictions are a necessary element of character. Every person alive ought to feel there's something in him that bribery can't touch, that influence cannot change, something that's not for sale, something he would not sacrifice or tamper with for any price, something for which he would give his life. Character is consistent. It's humble. All leaders need to be accountable. Character makes strong commitments and has discipline attached to it. That's what character is. In conclusion, character is made up of principles that give direction to life. They're based on convictions of right and wrong because of who you are. You see, Daniel and the 3 Hebrew children were totally separated from all godly influence, and yet they remained true to God. That's Christian character. Joseph was mistreated, abused, rejected, isolated from all that was holy and good, subjected to idolatry and lust, and yet he remained steady like the needle to the pole. That's character. God wants you to have Christian character. Let me close with this little story that I have here. In 1923, a very important meeting was held at the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago. Attending that meeting were 10 of the world's most successful financiers. They were the president of the largest independent steel company, president of the National City Bank, president of the largest utility company, the president of the largest gas company, the greatest wheat speculator, the president of the New York Stock Exchange, the greatest bear on Wall Street, a member of the president's cabinet, and president of the Bank of International Settlements. 10 of the most important financiers in the world. Let's talk about them. The president of the largest independent steel company was Charles Schwab. He died bankrupt and lived on borrowed money 5 years before his death. The president of the greatest utility company was Samuel Insull. He died a fugitive from justice. He was penniless in a foreign land. The president of the largest gas company was Howard Hobson, and he died insane. The greatest wheat speculator was Arthur Cotton. He died abroad, insolvent, which means he was broke. The president of the New York Stock Exchange, Richard Whitney, was recently released from Sing Sing Penitentiary. The member of the president's cabinet, Albert Fall, was pardoned from prison so he could go home and die. The greatest bear on Wall Street, Jesse Livermore, committed suicide in the Sherry Netherland Hotel. The head of the great monopoly, Ivor Krieger, died a suicide. The president of the Bank of International Settlement, Leon Fraser, died a suicide. All these men learned how to make money, but they did not know how to live. They had never heard somebody talk to them about Christian character. What a blessing we have that we can take that good old Word of God, that Bible, and we can make it our textbook to teach us how in our lives to develop Christian character.